Do you know what an actual field sales engineer is? It's not just a fancy title. A field sales engineer is typically someone that has gone to school for engineering and then they transitioned into sales. In this episode, I am chatting with Michael Baraky, and we're talking about what it takes to be an effective field sales engineer. We get deep into the art and the science of sales because if you're an engineer and you're selling, you literally have to use both sides of your brain. You have to be technically competent, but you also need to have the skills of a salesperson. I hope you enjoy this episode. So, Michael, tell us a bit about your company and the problems that you solve.
Sure. Thank you, Wesleyan. I work for a company called Harold Beck and Sons, known more commonly as Beck Electric Actuators, and we're an all-American made electric actuator based out of the Philadelphia area. I'm based in Colorado. We work primarily domestically and in Canada, so it's a fairly domestic company, and we have some people all around. An actuator is a piece of equipment that's used to actuate or move another piece of equipment, quite simply. So things like a damper or a valve in, say, a power plant or a water treatment plant that need to be automated, and actuators what sits there and actually automates those pieces. So a controller can be in his control room and the equipment can move remotely. And so we've manufactured that since 1936. It's Harold Beck and Sons because Harold Beck started it with his sons. He took a unique motor design that was started by General Electric in the 30s and developed an actuator around it. And we've been in business ever since in that same area, serving markets like power, steel production, cement and lime production, pulp and paper, and most notably now we deal in water treatment and wastewater treatment.
How did you get started in sales and how did you find yourself in this line of business that you're in today?
Yeah, my journey into sales was accidental, to be honest. I have degrees in engineering and started as an engineer in the oil and gas industry in Houston, Texas, and moved to Colorado and started working with a company. And it was a smaller company based here in the Colorado Springs area. And I was doing a lot more project management in a lot of ways, but because it was a smaller company, I reported directly to one of the sales heads for one of the divisions in the company, and he left kind of suddenly for some valid reasons, but it was a sudden departure, and so I just kind of took the role over, and then they were trying to replace him for a while, and unfortunately or fortunately for myself, either way, I ended up doing a good enough job that I got that role. And then that was probably 13 or 14 years ago now, and ever since then I've been in sales, and so it's been quite a fun journey. Three different companies in a sales role and a lot of different roles, and landed it back about 3.5 years ago and really enjoy it.
So I think that it's really interesting. You're an accidental salesperson. I'm an accidental salesperson. But I know for me, I tell people my chemist brain allows me to think about process and how things move from one to two to three to four. How have you found that your engineering background has really
Sure.
helped you in sales?
Absolutely. It's helped a tremendous amount. As an engineer, one of the things you learn is how to manage a process or develop a process and how to follow that and how to do things somewhat sequentially. But it also, you might not think about it with a lot of engineers, but it's generally true is that there's also got to be a lot of creativity in engineering because, physics is physics, chemistry is chemistry. Um, However, when you get into the real world, there's a lot of different ways to solve the same problem. So, using some of that process orientation as well as some of the creativity um, is really, I think, fundamental to being a good salesperson because it is a process. But at the same time, you're dealing with people generally. And so there's got to be, level of creativity, empathy, understanding, and some other, softer skills, which engineers aren't always thought to have, but it is something that's, I think, fairly common. And it's been really, really helpful in the sales path that I've been on.
And I think what you did is you really gave us a good overview of the art and science of sales, right? Because I think that some people are too much on the art. And
I agree.
so they have no process. They can't tell you how to close the last deal, and it's not going to work to close the next deal because there is just like, I just feel it in my gut. And then there are the people who have too much of the science of sales, if you will, and they
Absolutely.
just know I ask these questions, I check these boxes, but they don't know how to flow in it.
Yeah,
And as you mentioned, as an engineer, it gives you like you have to solve hard problems. And you don't always, there is no 1 + 1 = 2. You have to
absolutely.
figure out how to get here or how to get there.
I was I remember doing a sales training. I think it was a Miller Hyman training, and they were talking about something quite similar. Where they were talking about a spectrum really of very process oriented or just completely relationship oriented sales. And I had never thought about that to that point really in detail. And I remember another gentleman was in the class, and he was experienced. He had probably been in sales for 20, 25 years, and he was very clearly 100% relationship oriented. And he really thought that that way was the only way. That was it. And I was thinking to myself, you're probably in this class because your boss or your CEO or something thinks you probably need to mix in a little bit of process with your relationship. But at the same time, I think I was skewed more really strictly trying to stick to a process.
Yeah.
Um, and it was a good learning experience that you have to be in the middle. You have to do both. Uh, and I think, you're going to sell things, but no matter what, if you're selling a good product, some of them will sell. But to really be a good salesperson, you have to solve the problem. Like
Yeah.
otherwise, you're just selling a gadget, and that's not as special. So, to think about how to solve a problem. Well, there's the physical problem that the customer's having or the company's having, but then the people are also having a problem as well, and they might not necessarily be the same problem. And so you have to figure out in a complex sale how if your product can or your service or whatever you happen to be selling can solve that issue for everything. Otherwise it's only going to be a half solution, and maybe you get a quick sale, maybe you get something here and there. But to really be a successful salesperson, you have to make your customers successful, and that takes both ends of that spectrum that we were talking.
That's so good. It's really, a person, people have their own personal ambitions, goals, problems, and challenges. Companies have their own problems, ambitions, and challenges. And I actually met with somebody recently who went into this sales call and they were very focused on the one person they had a relationship with and they
Right.
ignored everyone else. And
Yep.
so what happened is they kind of came off tone deaf because it was like, but you're not speaking to me and those aren't my issues. And
Yeah.
so if we don't really take the time to use, I'd like to say use our brains a little bit and not just follow scripts and really lean into, well, what is the problem at hand right now? And sometimes a problem your prospect or your customer is having, you can't solve it. And that's okay. But that's what's on their brain. So you
Yeah.
stick with them where they are.
Yep. You're exactly right. Yeah. You get into the complexity of it, and there are multiple decision makers. They all have different things that they want to see at the outcome. And the other thing is that if you can't solve that problem, the best thing to do is not to let somebody else that can solve the problem solve it. And that's a hard thing, I think, in sales as well, and sometimes gets lost because you make one person happy but you don't make anyone happy. That's going to damage your reputation, and the reputation of your company.
So talk to us about the one of the hardest challenges or difficulties you had in the world of sales or even in sales leadership.
I was thinking about this actually yesterday, quite a bit. When you're on the sales side of a company, you can only do so much. You're only controlling so much in the company. You rely so much on your company, on your operations people, on your finance people and your customer service people that work for your company. You can only control one piece of it. So one of the challenges is you may have done a great job really understanding a customer's problem, at every level. You have that solution, you go to implement it, but I'm not going to build the actuator. I've built them in training. It's a lot of fun, but I don't do it on a daily basis. So I have to trust the people at the factory to do that and for everything to flow smoothly through. And that's a challenge because on two levels. One, if they make a mistake, it's really me on the line. Like I'm going to be the one that has to get there and deal with that at a customer level. But also, like naturally, if you're a caring person, you want to make it go perfectly, but you have to be willing to let go and trust those other people. So I think the biggest challenge I've noticed recently with sales is just being able to allow yourself to rely on the rest of your team to do their job after you've done yours. And I've thought a lot about that because then part of it is what can I do to help make them successful as well? You have to recognize that you're, the guy that's assembling something on your production line or the person that's, dealing with invoicing or something of that nature is also your customer as a salesperson. They're my customer as well. And I have a responsibility on both sides. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about how do we, at my current company, do both of those things better. And not, if anyone hears this from my company, we're a great company and we do everything, we do things very well. And I think we're well respected in the industries, but you can always improve. And I think salespeople sometimes don't think about that internal piece, and that can lead to some problems externally as well. Because if you don't do a good enough job setting it up, your factory may be doing exactly what they think they're supposed to be doing to solve this issue, and they're really not. So it's that two directional, customer base that you have to think about.
In my sales training, one of the modules that I teach is the salesperson being the nucleus, right?
Yeah,
And so I tell them
it's really
the
good.
nucleus, not the head. I'm
Yeah,
a scientist, right? So what does it mean to be the nucleus? And you're not just the person at the head directing everything. The nucleus means that it's on you to engage the external customers with the internal customers, right? Like
that's very
you
well said.
have to also sell because let's say you have a really big order and you know that in order for that person to send that PO, you might need to get stepped a few places before some things that are in line. You need
Yeah,
to have that bridge built where you can go to the factory
yeah,
and say, hey, I don't ask for favors often, but I would really appreciate
yeah,
XYZ. But if you're only barking at them and telling them they're doing a bad job or this was later, they're not going to do you any favors. And so
absolutely.
selling to the internal customer is really, really important
It is.
because it helps you to build your business externally.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important on a cultural piece as well, inside, the workplace culture for a company, because some companies are built to do that, and other companies actually try to silo things. And so you have to watch for that because if you end up in a company that's very siloed, then it's very hard to do that. That's a red flag, as well. And so that's something else to watch out for, because you're right. If you can't go and ask for a favor when you need it, that's going to be a problem. But at the same time, if you're not able to communicate with those people and show how you respect what they do, then they're not going to want to do that favor for you. They're not going to understand why they're doing it. That's the key. I think of some people, I always see their face that are on my current company's production floor. And it's like, well, I care about those people, but I'm allowed to care about those people with my current company as well. I'm allowed to, work that two-angled, approach to solving an issue internally and externally. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
important.
not a us versus them. This is something that
Yeah.
I also like to say. I'm like, we're one company, guys. It's
Yeah.
your win is their
Yeah.
win, right?
Yeah.
Your profitability is their profitability. Like we are one company.
Yeah.
So when we think about your sales team, I know different companies that are that do field sales do it differently. Some people have a
Yeah.
dedicated inside sales. Some people have
Yeah.
their field sales people doing everything, maybe even installations and training. How
Yeah.
is your organization set up?
We're I wouldn't say we're small, but we're not a big corporation. So we wear a few hats as the title we give our field salespeople is sales engineer. Our salespeople all are engineers by degree, because we are solving a technical problem. So we require that, and so what's good about that is we generally have people that like to be a little bit hands-on. We do have that field responsibility to help with installation, to help with reviewing applications, to select the correct piece of equipment and how it's going to be set up, and some of that kind of that engineering work that the customer needs, as well as that technical support level. If something does happen in the field where something stops working or just isn't working as expected, to go out and fix that problem. So we do wear that hat. We also have to do a lot of our own, quotation type work that some organizations might have, all inside salespeople putting the numbers together. We handle some of that, but we do have that inside support team. We have application engineers that are also able to support in those instances. We work together really well. Those two teams, applications engineering and sales engineering, work very closely together to make sure everyone's on the same page with different things. So it's a bit of a matrix or a hodgepodge, I guess, in terms of um, the roles and responsibilities. We all wear, a few hats, and but it works really well. I personally like to be in the field. I want to be close to the customer because it helps me understand the problems better, and I also like to, do a lot of the paperwork, like things like quotations and some of the other review work that needs to get done, because again, it helps me understand the process better. But then it's also nice to have a team of other experts to support.
Yeah, so full cycle salesperson. That's how I grew up. That's what I did. I sold capital equipment. I used to drive around. I would have my instrument in the back. I would have my tools in the
The hard
back.
hat.
Yes, hard hat, steel toe boots. Like, and I know for me, it helped me because I would do some installations, but I also did demos, right? And
Yeah,
I didn't do heavy service work, but if
yeah,
somebody had something small that was broken, I could pop in there, fix it for them, and they feel like, wow, she got me up and running.
yeah.
But what that did for me is I understood how so many people use their instruments. So
That's
when I
correct.
went to sell them, I spoke from a different place. I
Yeah,
wasn't speaking just as a salesperson who's just showing you pictures, right?
yeah,
Like, I'm like, I use this thing. I
yeah.
know how to come in here and set this thing up, and I can run your samples. And that was one
Exactly.
thing that really set me apart from my competitors. A lot of them would run the base samples. I'm
Oh,
like, give
100%.
me whatever you have. Give me good, give me bad. Let me show you what's
Absolutely.
different, right? And so
Yeah,
I know having that technical background and still being so intimately
yeah.
connected with the customer really does set you apart in this world.
It does. Well, it builds trust as well, right? Which is very important because um, people don't trust, naturally just don't trust salespeople. And that's because there's a lot of, I think, sales people or sales organizations that don't value that trust. They're trying to just push product. And so to differentiate yourself, you have to develop that level of trust, and to actually be able to go in there and show some knowledge. It helps build that trust. But it's not a game. You are really solving a problem. So, you're actually doing something that deserves that level of trust. And so I think that's a really great way to go about it. And give
So
me
when
your
you,
hardest problem.
yeah, literally, it's
Yeah,
I'm like, give me good, give me bad. Literally, this is
absolutely.
baseline. When I always, for me, that leaning on the art of sales, I would explain their problems in their language. So I'm a chemist, but I sold to engineers, so I had to learn how to speak engineer. So I'm explaining things to them, and I'm telling them, I'm like, this is happening because of this, and this is why it's impacting that, and this is why this is failing, and it's like light bulb. And so it's like there is no pricing concession. There is no negotiation. You solved the problem for me. And so I need
Right.
not just this instrument, I need you because I
Yeah.
know you come with the package.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times people are just selling a widget or just selling a
Yeah.
thing, and they don't realize that their expertise and what they bring to the
Yeah.
table actually is a difference factor.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the differentiator. My company right now is unique in that nobody really does exactly what we do. Our equipment is
Mhm.
very, very unique. Um, but there's plenty of other really good products out there that could be commoditized in the view of a customer. They may not understand. And even with my product that's very unique, it still has the word electric actuator. And there's, dozens of different electric actuators. And if you just Google it, you're going to think they're the same thing,
Yeah.
and so it's very easy to get stuck into that price concession or negotiation. Um, if you're, but you're right, if you're solving a problem and if you're doing some of that work, realistically, the price that you have to sell your product for should be great value to the customer. That's really where you want to set yourself apart because it's easy to be commoditized. Or, even if you don't have a widget, for somebody to look upon your product or your service as a widget, and that may not be true. So differentiating right there is very important.
And so, one of the things that I find in this world of technical sales or sales engineers is when you hire really smart people,
Yes.
sometimes the sales part is a challenge for them.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you guys have bridged that gap between the technical and the sales piece?
Yeah. It takes a certain person for sure. Just like anything, this type of sale is not going to be for everyone.
Right.
And that's okay. That's not a bad thing to say. So I think, you do have to look for people in the hiring process that have that ability to do both, to be the engineer, but also to step outside of the boundaries and be a good salesperson as well and interact with customers and solve those types of issues externally as well. But you get people at all different parts of that process, right? Potential is one thing, but then there's a lot of training that goes into it. At our company, one of our biggest things is we don't do pressure sales in any way, shape, or we're employee owned. We're not worried quarter to quarter. So, I'm speaking from that perspective. But with that, if you're able to be a little bit more patient, that's a little bit easier. And I think for good reasons, but you're able to develop slower with the customer. You don't have to get right to the purchase order. You can, develop that relationship, which for an engineer, I think might be a little bit easier to, if you don't have to rush, right? Because we are process oriented
That's
people and
good.
you can take your time and learn, and it's not linear. Um, so, with that, it still takes a lot of coaching. We have some younger sales engineers on the team, and they're extremely talented people. But some of them are stronger with the sales aspect than others, and some are stronger with the technical aspect than others. And so, realistically, it's a person by person kind of process to teach them how to be a good engineer, but be a good sales engineer and get out there with the customer, run that process. And there's a lot of back end stuff like Salesforce that they're not going to teach you in college either as an engineer. So you have to, work with some of that stuff as well.
Yeah. So when you think about them, especially having a young team, a question that people often ask me is, well, how do I motivate them? How do I
Sure.
get them excited about their job? What are some things that you've done to truly motivate them?
I'm lucky in that I've always worked with young salespeople that care
Yeah.
because that's I can't train that or teach that. They genuinely care. And so I think if you start there, the motivation somewhat becomes intrinsic because you just need to show what we're doing matters.
Hmm.
So you bring somebody new on, they're young, and if you can really display the problems we've solved and what that's meant to people and to companies and to the remember when we particularly deal with generating power or helping to clean water. Well, those are very important things. And if we um, as a company can understand our benefit and then can clearly communicate that to younger salespeople that care, I think they get that motivation. I mean, obviously, everybody's going to be motivated to work by compensation. That matters, right? But there's many companies that compensate well. So how do you go beyond that, right? So obviously, I think Beck is a very we treat our employees pretty well. We pay well. That part is all important, but how do you take that next step? Well, we also solve some really important problems. and we help some very important industries to the global economy, to people, to safety, to comfort. So, you know, if you have the right people and you can really explain that story and get people to understand why what they do matters, it's very easy to think this is just a job, like any job. But if you really can explain how your job impacts multiple things, if you have the right people, that's going to be very motivating. That's always been motivating to me more than just the paycheck. That matters. That's why we work, sure. But why do I work here? Why do I want to go the extra mile here? And that's really the story. I want to be making a difference.
Yeah, and I think that it's getting people connected to the joint vision, the mission of the organization, you as a leader, right?
Yeah.
Because the adage that people don't leave companies, they leave managers is true.
It's
And
very true.
so if you don't help your employees see why this is a place that they should work, that they should stay, then when that recruiter comes and gives them a few $1,000s more, they're gone, right?
Exactly.
Or whatever that thing is. So making them understand that they are an important and valuable part of this organization, I think is key. One of the things at the time of recording this podcast, there's a lot happening in the realm of the economy.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious in terms of your sales team, excuse me, what are some of the things that you guys are challenged with right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, the last honestly 2 weeks even have really changed a lot. I feel like things are so much different than they were even a month ago with some
Mm,
of the different economic things going on, things like tariffs and things,
yeah.
with some of the just the different negotiations that are going on in a macroeconomic scale. They bring challenges, at the microeconomic level. And we're certainly seeing that. Our customers aren't sure what to do in a lot of instances. There's definitely companies that are holding on to capital spending and just not doing anything. It's not that they're just waiting to kind of see what turns out. And obviously we're starting to see pricing impacts from different policies and things like that. A lot of projects that were getting underway are now over budget because there's maybe a 30% price increase on certain things. So we're definitely seeing that economic challenge. And I think, from a salesperson perspective, you can't control that
Yeah.
piece of it.
Yeah.
So it goes again back to um, the problem you have to solve. If things are going to cost 30% more, there are going to be some customers that just can't do it anymore. That's just a reality. But if you're still out there solving those problems, then you're going to still position yourself as well as you can. And I think that's always a comparison. I always talk a lot about, market share. Like, are our sales down or are they up because we're taking or losing market share, or is it just things better or worse? We personally in our company during the supply chain crunch that was a result of COVID, we're an American company, so that was a competitive advantage that we had. Well, that as salespeople, then let's go out and try to leverage that.
Yeah.
We didn't have things stuck on ships. We
Yeah.
were able to supply our customers. A lot of our competitors, just by nature of their supply chain, could no longer do that. They were waiting on parts or they were waiting on things they needed, entire units. And we were then able to capitalize on that. So I think as a salesperson, when you get into an environment like this, it's going to be extremely volatile. Whether it ends better or worse is hard to say, but it's going to be volatile. That's almost assured. Position yourself to take market share in that case. How can your company succeed if the economy is going to go into a recession at any point in the future? When that happens, your numbers are probably going to go down because
Yeah.
people just aren't going to be. You can't control that piece, but what I can control, we've known every recession ends and goes back up, and people start spending money again, and companies start spending money again, and the capital spending goes back up. Have you positioned yourself in that downtime, to
Yeah.
capitalize when it ramps? And I think that's an important piece, not just for salespeople, but for sales leadership, because it's very easy to just hunker down, lay off people, and do whatever. But then things get good again, and you're not ready for it,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you miss the you miss the ramp in a lot of instances. So, positioning yourself well in these types of times is important.
That's good. And following up to that, where do you see your company in the next 5 years?
Our company has been growing on a pretty steady clip. Um, there's been some great things that we've got going on internally, some new products we're developing that are going to help us service the market even better. We've always focused on having top of the line customer service. Um, and so, as a salesperson, I've always said with this current company, I've always been on the front foot because our customers aren't upset. They're happy with the product, they're happy with the service. When things do go wrong, they get resolved quickly, and fairly to the customer. So um, I think, we are positioned pretty well to weather any volatility and any storm that happens to come. I think we'll continue to take market share, and it's really an exciting time to be part of the company.
Awesome. And final question I have for you. If you could go back to your younger self and give Michael some advice just starting out in field sales, what would it be?
I received this advice from a CFO, but I think I didn't know this early in my career, and I try to share this. He said to me, uh, and it was in a difficult situation with a customer, and they were being difficult, and we were trying to help, and he said, use only as much leverage as necessary. And I think that's something I would have told my younger self. I was as a younger person was kind of full gas all the time. And sometimes you don't need that. So using only as much leverage as necessary in difficult situations, I think is important because it results in a better and longer lasting outcome.
That's good. That's good. That's good. I like to say, don't pull rank if you don't need to, right?
Exactly.
Don't pull in your
Yeah,
CEO or your manager if they don't need to be there, right? It's really
absolutely.
important. Only use as much as you need.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, Michael, this has been a fantastic conversation. If people want to get
great.
in contact with you, what is the one best way?
My email address is challenging to say out loud, I think, but it's if you go to haroldbeck.com, my contact information is right there. I have a phone number and email address. You feel free to reach out at any time.
Awesome, awesome. And we'll make sure to include those in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, your talent, and your expertise today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Wesley. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.